Greetings and welcome back to Room 303, AP English World of Ideas lecture. We are in unit number 7, the unit called Faith. And this is lecture number 41, the Prophet Muhammad, and we'll be working with a text from the Koran. We'll be working with Surah number 40, the Believer, as it's often referred to, and we'll be working with the Dawud translation from 1956. Now, as I have said in previous lectures at learnstrong.net, specific to unit number 7, a good number of you have asked that I would give a series of comments on world religions and especially on Islam. Hey guys, this is not that lecture. Here, we don't have the time. We are simply dealing with a single piece of writing within the compositional volume called World of Ideas. And we'll be looking at this piece of writing the way we looked at earlier texts from the teachings of the Buddha, from St. Matthew in the New Testament, looking with the same kind of intentionality as we looked at the Bhagavad Gita. Okay? However, having said that, we want to remind ourselves of a few concepts that specifically would be interesting for this discussion. Our non-apologetic approach to a religion. Now this is hypercritical in 303 when we start talking about different religious faiths. Two approaches, as we have said. An apologetic approach to a faith system is to ask what's right or what's wrong about that faith system. There is, however, a non-apologetic approach to a faith system. We're following the great Houston Smith here, Religions of the World, where we're not interested in debating what's right or what's wrong with these religious faiths and their teachings and practices. We just want to know about them as best we can, especially as we turn to some of the sacred texts, in this case, the Holy Koran, right? As well, just to remind, in earlier conversations, we'll point out the evolution, as it's sometimes referred to, of religious ideologies and religious practices and faith systems. Judaism gives way to Christianity, which in turn gives way to Islam. We'll talk a little of the history of that in a bit. Just like Hinduism is the roots system for Buddhism, and then ultimately in China and Japan, Zen Buddhism. Now for Islam, to reduce it to a single set of principles is obviously as difficult for this religious faith as for any other religious faith. But often it has been said that Islam is predicated on the understanding of 5 pillars, as it's sometimes referred to, principles of practice, we might say. The first of those is a profession of faith. We have 5 daily prayers as a part of the Islamic practice, almsgiving, as well as fasting, especially during Ramadan, and then finally the pilgrimage to Mecca. We'll think about our comments on Chaucer's Canterbury Tales and the pilgrimage to Canterbury. You can look at learnstrong.net in our observations there. Now, any translator, and Dawud certainly fell under this rule, will say that the Quran is very difficult, if not difficult, impossible to translate out of the Arabic. Having said that, we will be looking at the Dawud translation and trying to get a sense of what this text is about. Now, our assumptions, they have to be stated, as we've already given several already. The assumption here, as you've been following our Learn Strong lectures at learnstrong.net, lectures 1 through 40, especially lecture 38, where we talked about Buddhism, lecture 39, St. Matthew and the teachings of Christ in the Sermon on the Mount, and lecture 40, the Bhagavad Gita. We'll be referencing some of that as we go through this conversation, so I pointed out to you. We also assume your understanding of our learning theory, the desire to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways, especially in our active reading, where we try to address 3 questions. What does the text say? We're simply summarizing. What does the text mean at 2A themes, messages, and our big 5? What does the text say about epistemology, what we can know, ontology, who we are, psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of group minds, and then finally, theodicy, the existence of pain, suffering in the world. And then at 2B, we ask about rhetoric, and we'll point out, as we did with our other study, we'll point out some of the rhetorical techniques involved. Finally, at level 3, we'll ask, how can I relate to this information in some meaningful way? At 3A, other titles, especially, of course, the ones in Unit 7 of Jacobus that we're looking at. And then finally, how can I relate to this information personally? Let's go through some background information. Jacob is providing some of this for us. Of course, Muhammad, the prophet, dates roughly 570 to 632 Common Era. He is born in Mecca, the holiest city, of course, in Islam, now Saudi Arabia. In 610, he begins to have visions and revelations that, of course, are, as he tells it, from the Archangel Gabriel. His wife is a great supporter and encourager of Muhammad, and so he becomes known as the Rasul Allah, the messenger of God. Muhammad's words are written down and collected roughly 650 Common Era, and roughly around 613 Muhammad begins proselytizing, preaching, spreading his message. He has a small number of followers, some 39, that expand to some 70. In 620, we have the famous night journey, and then in 622, we will have the Hajj, as it's sometimes referred to, the immigration from Mecca to Medina. And of course, Muslims will in fact begin, right, the modern era in 622 for this reason. Muhammad's religion, of course, is termed Islam, which technically means surrender to Allah's will, and his followers were called Muslims, those who have surrendered. By 625, we have the Battle of Uhud, and the Muslims are defeated, but by 627, we have the important victory at Medina, where the city is then turned over ostensibly to Muhammad. And then there is some exiling that happens, especially to a Jewish clan there. And by 630 then, with Mecca surrendering, the city becomes the Prophet's, and the faith then begins to grow officially from 630 on. Now that's the background information. Let's now turn to some of the rhetoric that's involved in the Quran. I'm with you on page 619 and following. Now, again, the point being made that believers of the faith will often say you can't really translate the Quran. You must read it in its original languages. The 114 surahs or chapters are a part of understanding the rhetorical techniques as well. We'll be working with surah number 40, often referred to as the believer, or the forgiving one, as it sometimes is translated. I'll just work with what Jacobus has to say on 619, 620 of your volume. He says, God speaks directly to Muhammad, usually speaking as we, but sometimes shifting to an I or a he. The shifting point of view may imply the all-inclusive nature of God. The use of dialogue is characteristic of the text, but narrative is also introduced early on, so we'll think about our study of Plato in regards to dialogue. The study of Moses, for example, paragraphs 13 through 32, demonstrates how God sends his message to the world and how believers will respond to those messages. Noah, in paragraph 3, was a believer who built the ark in response to the word he received from God. The willingness of unbelievers to be violent toward him is an important detail, just as Pharaoh's willingness to slay infants and children in order to, quote, slay Moses, in, quote, paragraph 15. For religious purposes, the most important rhetorical quality of the text is its use of declarations, such as, he reveals, quote, he reveals to you his signs, in, quote, paragraph 53, coupled with questions to the listener, such as, quote, which of God's signs do you deny, end quote, from paragraph 53. This method involves the listener in an active role, while also imparting the truth. Jewish and Christian wisdom books also use these techniques, particularly interspersing rhetorical questions to keep the listener alert to the need eventually to answer to his God. The believer, which is the surah we'll be working with, number 40, is especially important because it contrasts those who believe in Allah with those who believe in idols. It's said that when Muhammad re-entered triumphantly to Mecca, he entered the Kaaba, approached each of the more than 100 idols, and reached from his camel with his stick to knock over each idol as he said, the truth has come. The believer, the Koran, the surah that we'll be working with, is about the truth that has come and describes the necessity of faith in a God who supplants all idols and all others. Now, what we said about our readings of earlier sacred texts is true as well of the Quran. Here we're reading one surah out of the 114. You can't make a lot of generalizations about all of Christianity from reading just the Sermon on the Mount. And you certainly cannot do the same thing with Islam as it relates to a single surah. So as we go through this at level 1, we'll be recognizing a limited perspective, and yet we want to pay attention again to the rhetorical techniques. That's our focus here. Let's go to work. Paragraphs 1 through 3. This book is revealed by the one true God. Only unbelievers dispute what he reveals, and they will be punished. Epistemologically, an absolutist position right from the start. Paragraphs 4 through 7. On the day of judgment, those who are with God will ask him to forgive and reward believers, but unbelievers will not be forgiven. Paragraphs 8 through 10. God gives his signs and his spirit to those whom he chooses. Worship God, for at the judgment day he will triumph, and all will be rewarded or punished. Paragraphs 11 through 12. Warn unbelievers that nothing can save them. Have they not seen what God has done to punish unbelievers in the past? Paragraphs 13 through 16. We sent Moses to tell the truth to Pharaoh, Haman, and Koran. But they rejected the truth and sought to slay Moses and those who believed. Paragraphs 17 through 20. One of Pharaoh's relatives, a secret true believer, urged Pharaoh to spare Moses and warn the people about God's punishment. Pharaoh insisted on his rightness, but the true believer again warned the people, reminding them of their past lack of faith. Paragraph 21-22. Pharaoh persisted in his doubt, and his actions led to destruction. Paragraph 23 through 24. The true believer again addressed the people, urging them to follow the right path and to turn away from false gods. Paragraph 25-26. Entrusting himself to God, the true believer was saved, but a scourge came on Pharaoh's people. On the day of judgment, they will be sent to the fire. Paragraph 27 through 30. In the fire, they will argue among themselves and plead for relief from torment, but their pleas will be useless because they did not believe. Paragraph 31-33. We will help those who believe and will punish the guilty. We gave guidance to the Israelites, therefore we patiently entrust in God. Paragraph 34 through 38. Despite the many signs of God's power and goodness, most men continue to disbelieve. Paragraph 39 through 40. God has created all things. There is no other God, yet men turn away from him. Paragraph 41 to 43. Blessed be God. Pray to him, worship him, reject idols, and surrender to the Lord of the universe. Of course, this surrender is pivotal to the understanding of the Islamic faith. Paragraphs 44-45. God created you, giving you life from infancy to old age. He is the author of all things. Paragraph 46 through 49. Those who deny the revelations of God will see the truth hereafter and will suffer in hell. They will be chastised for their wicked lives. And then to finish this reading, paragraph 50 through 51, be patient, and God's promise will be fulfilled. Muhammad, even if we do not let you glimpse in this life the punishment that awaits unbelievers, we will bring the unbelievers to justice. We have sent other apostles before you, and they gave signs through the power of God. Paragraph 52 to 56, God gives men animals to use for food and transportation. His signs are many. Unbelievers fail to see the fate of those who before them fail to see the fate of those before them who rejected God. Boastful and proud, they scoffed at God's signs, repenting too late, only after they had seen God's might. Well, there's the reading. Let's now talk at level 2 and 3 some interpretive ideas, beginning at level 2a. That is to say, what does this text mean? Let's work first of all with our big five, as we call it. That is to say, first of all, what is this text about epistemology? Absolute, or relative, or somewhere in between, the fallibilist position? I want to make the observation that it's pretty clear. Anytime we're working with sacred revelation, sacred texts that are presenting some kind of revealed truths, it almost always seems to be a certain kind of absolutist epistemological position. However, think about any of these religious texts, including the Koran, as really challenging the reader to not hold an absolutist position if it is in somehow opposition to the will of deity. That is to say, the fallibilist position. Consider the possibility, in other words, that you could be wrong. So we'll have an interesting epistemological dance that gets played in any religious text, and certainly here. Ontologically, what is going on in this text? Well, obviously, who are we? A child of God and expected to surrender and behave appropriately. Psychologically, well, notice the power of fear here to motivate, no question, especially with the potentiality of an afterlife punishment. We know, of course, about this from our study of Milton and Paradise Lost, no question. Sociologically, what does this text say? The respect for others, taking care of others, stands behind this notion of believers and non-believers. Of course, the argument is that Islam in its rendering is a religion of peace for this reason. And then finally, theodicy and the existence of pain and suffering in the world. It's pretty clear, even just from this reading, that the teaching is that pain and suffering comes primarily because one refuses to surrender and to show proper obeisance. At 2a, messages, obviously true believers are those who surrender to God's will, and punishments obviously will happen to those who do not modulate their behavior accordingly. At 2b, notice the compelling poetry that you were reading. Again, this is just a single surah, as we said. We don't want it to simply be the one thing that leads you to have full understandings of Islam. It can't happen that way. In the same way as we said, you can't read one cutting from the Bhagavad Gita and have a sense of what that entire text is about either. But the word pictures are compelling. For those of you who have studied with us in junior literature in the AP or in the junior folder in LearnStrong.net, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, the Jonathan Edwards passage, this will of course sound somewhat similar. You can go and take a look at that. At 3a, well, what are we going to relate this to? Think about our study of Buddhism, our study of the teachings of Jesus Christ in the Sermon on the Mount from the 1611 King James Version of the Bible, as well as our studies of the Bhagavad Gita, and ask this simple question for yourself and take a few notes. How are they similar, these all four of these texts? How are they quite different? And in what ways different? And again, the readings are where we're focusing, right? As well at 3a, we could make observations, as we've already made, about the guidance of someone like Houston Smith, very influential thinker for us. Finally, at 3b, how are we going to relate this information to ourselves personally? What was a time that you had to surrender or acquiesce or give up? And how did that work out for you? And what made you decide that surrendering was worth your time? Well, we end now the part of Unit 7 that specifically treats sacred texts, and we're now ready to move on. And we're going to spend the rest of Unit 7 thinking about religious experience. We're going to begin with Teresa of Avila. I hope that you're enjoying and growing from our study in Jacobus's World of Ideas. Thank you.